Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another Seattle Data Guy Live. Today we have Aaron with us, Aaron Wilkerson. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Glad I'm on the show today.
Yeah. And just as a quick background, currently you're director of, I know it's director of like data and analytics, but what is the title at Carhartt? Now that I'm thinking
Director
about it.
of Data Strategy and Products at Carhartt.
Yes, yeah. Once you start getting to those larger companies, it gets more specific. That's always interesting. It's like director of very specific area. But yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Carhartt, which gotta. I think I was just listening to Comedian have a good bit about Carhartt. But how'd you kind of get started in the data world?
Yeah, I lucked out. I my bachelor's degree was in electrical engineering. So did that for 5 years, and then towards my senior year, I realized that I did not want to do engineering when I graduated from college. I met a lot of guys who were much smarter than me and got a lot more involved in the engineering hands-on stuff. So, luckily, went to a career fair. The company I used to work for out of college, Accenture,
Hmm.
was there. So I heard about the wonderful world of consulting and travel, and to a 22-year-old sounds amazing. Oh, I get to travel and do these projects. So jumped into consulting. My first project was local, so there was no travel for the first 2 years. It was just outside the Detroit area, and then I was on a data team. So back in the day when we had physical servers, we used to use before SAP bought them. I worked a lot with business objects. So
Oh yeah.
building out reporting servers, building up security, admin type of tasks. So I lucked out where my first job out of college was like, I didn't know of a data. To me, it was just like building servers and applying security and adding people in user groups. But then like it built over time where it went from administrative tasks to then doing learn about ETL, data warehousing, data architecture, data leadership. So I lucked out. I'm sure I'm one of the rare people who have only been in data. So I've only worked in data my entire career. Now it's going on 17 years.
Wow. I think one business objects brings me back, but then you also it sounds like maybe that kind of initial kind of work does it feel more like DBA kind of work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean we had some DBAs on our team. It was much more like before the cloud, it was you had like a cluster of like 4 servers. So
Yeah.
you had to install the software, you had to deploy all of the packages, you had to set up like the user groups because only certain users had access to certain universes, set up the report. So it was a lot more like back end. Also, we had a lot of desktop clients.
Mm.
So like Desky was a thing back then. So you had to install like the actual client. So if people say, "Hey, my Desky won't launch," you have to like help them uninstall and reinstall. So it was a lot of just old school, just like it's kind of like a reporting help desk group, so to
Mm.
speak. So all those kind of issues where they couldn't see a report, they couldn't see certain folders, their client wasn't working, patching, like all that kind of more help desk type or service desk type of activity, but for mainly for like reporting. But we did have DBAs, but that was such a foreign concept to me. I just didn't understand at all what they were doing because it was kind of in the same team, but they were a different group of guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we dive too deep into the data world, which will be the next set of questions, what do you do outside of the data world? Because I feel like data can be a little bit all encompassing.
Yeah. So I have a bunch of kids. So this type of year, my boys are big into football. So I spend most of my days kind of getting them back and forth to school, back and forth to practice every
Mm.
day. Football, it's a 6 day a week, so they have 5 days a week of practice. They have games on Saturdays, so it's a lot of back and forth with getting my kids to activities. My son's in the school play; they're doing Newsies, which is a Disney it was a movie. Now then it was a Broadway play, but they're doing that, so it's also getting him to rehearsals. My daughter's involved, so it's just kind of full contact parenting right now, just getting kids back and forth to activities. So that's what I do when I'm not working in data or talking about data.
Yeah. It sounds like another full time job.
Yeah, it's a lot of coordination. To my right here, we have a very basic kind of family calendar on the wall, and it's just filled with like, okay, we have to be here this day. So a lot of it is just kind of planning right around where do we need to be when. And I'm always looking each day. Okay, do I need to be somewhere today? No, today's off. Okay, I get the evening to myself, but normally it's just kind of figuring out where I need to be and when.
Yeah. Awesome. No, I'm glad you always have something outside of it, and it's good to hear that.
Yeah, it's hopeful to have something to turn off because if I didn't, then I'd just be working 24/7. So they luckily I work from home most of the time. So I drop them off, come home to a quiet house, and then come 3:30, like you can hear the garage door opening, and then the sound comes in, and then I got to move up to my upstairs office, and I got an hour, and then it's back to full time parenting. So it's a nice change of pace, between work and parenting, but it's good though.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of kind of maybe like productivity and like organizational, trying to improve workflows, but now going back to companies. In one of your posts, it was about 2 months ago, you said something like, "I have a challenge for anyone looking to leverage AI to improve productivity. Start by improving productivity without AI. If you can't basically do that, you can start. You shouldn't basically be talking about AI. How do you think data teams and companies are getting AI and data wrong, and
Yeah.
how can we kind of start improving that in the business?"
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing is that I think we get very excited. So a lot of us are very excited about like technology, new capabilities, the shiny object syndrome. The challenge is we lead with that. So instead of saying, okay, the business has this problem that they're looking to solve, what's the best way to solve it? We typically kind of say, okay, I heard about this thing called like Copilot, Chat GPT, Gen AI. So let me go and find different ways to use it within the business. So you're kind of searching for problems. So, and with that, I think part of the challenge too is that we're going after these very new methods, which is great. But if you're trying out different techniques that don't have a long track record, then you're offering up a solution that even you can't stand behind to say, okay, yeah, we know companies have been doing these things for years and years. We have ability to support it. You're kind of like trying things out brand new with the business. But if they're going to be leveraging your solution to solve a problem, they're expecting that it's just going to work like full
Yeah,
like all the time. So I think with a lot of these different new techniques, like some of them are much more exploratory, where it's like we don't have a great track record, or even companies still figuring out. So we're kind of putting ourselves at a disadvantage, where our businesses are looking at us as the experts to say, okay, this is how we think you should use it. Here's how we're going to support you. But I think in many cases, because we're so excited, we're just kind of trying out different techniques just because we're excited. We're going to try things out, but we're really not leading with, okay, what's the business problem? What's the simplest way I can solve this? And what's a much more repeatable pattern around, we think that this is going to work for you, because once they implement the solution, like they're expecting that you're going to be there 24/7 to support it. But if you can or say, well, we don't know, we never experienced it, then their confidence in you drops significantly. So I think that's where we kind of have to pull back the excitement and say, okay, is this the best solution for this? And even taking AI out of the picture, how about more about convincing yourself, okay, how do you convince yourself that AI is the right approach versus was starting with that? Like, be much more of a pessimist and say, okay, convince me, prove to me that this is the best option, versus starting with that and saying, okay, let's just try AI on this and then figuring out how to make it all work, which I think we're seeing through just more statistics and surveys that we're not doing too good with some of these deployments.
um what was I just well, there's like a few different thoughts I had. One, I was thinking the fact that it's interesting because when I first started in the data world, and I think this is what we all have, right? You have this optimism because you've never experienced
Yeah,
like you've never like had to actually deploy anything into production, or put anything there. So it's like any new idea that anyone brings you, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's like that sounds amazing. Let's let's
yeah,
let's do that. But I think like after, I don't know, maybe it takes like 7 or 10 years, and then that's where they, I think, start calling people. You start getting into that like old grumpy data person, and everyone's just like, "Why do you keep saying no to everything?" You're like, "Cause I've seen it. I've seen the
yeah,
marketing." I think in one of your interviews, you referenced like self-service analytics and like Tableau, and I was like, "Yeah, that was something that I recall when I first came in." I was like, "Yeah, self-service analytics. It's the way. Tableau is the way." Like, because like again, you're just like new to the area, so it's like this naivety that you're just like, "Oh yeah, this is how you solve all the problems."
yeah. I mean, I think you go through enough projects and you kind of, you scrape your knees, you get a little dirty. Do you realize that, I don't want to go through that again? Like that was rough. And it's very hard because when people put their trust in you, they're expecting that you've done the due diligence to say that this is the right solution. So
Yeah.
if you say, I think this is the right approach, they implement it, they trust in you, and it breaks and you can't solve it, or they have to go back to like the old manual way, that's a very hard pain, because usually you probably spend a lot of money and resources. I mean, even people are losing their jobs over these implementations going bad because they're spending thousands, 100,000, millions of dollars on these solutions, all for it to fall apart. So I think, like you said, when you've seen people that are much more experienced, it's probably because they've been through this quite a bit and they've seen what happens on the other side of it when these things go wrong. So it's like, let's go with the tried and true version versus trying like these different like skunk works or innovation projects that, or you can try it, but do it on much more low impact, low visibility type of things to kind of get, your hands, your feet wet. Before you're trying to go on, you really don't want to try the home run project on your very first implementation of this and put your career on the line.
Yeah. That was gonna kind of be the follow-up, is like, how do you find that balance, right? Because obviously on one side you do want to try new things, right? You don't want
Yeah.
your company to fall behind, and you want them to like, yeah, we should probably do a little bit of these new things, while also making sure you're balancing, delivering. Like, how do you kind of either communicate that to the business, or make sure you're trying to always push the right amount of kind of new stuff so that you're not falling behind at the same time?
I mean, that's where I think having somewhat of a roadmap. I mean, I want to say pilot, but you also don't want to just do pilot and POC that doesn't go anywhere. So I think you have to have kind of a vision of, ultimately we want to come up with this. Ultimately, we want to have this result. This is how we get there, but we want to make sure we test and learn along the way. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. But also, you have to have some type of criteria of success so that you don't just sit in pilot mode forever and nothing ever gets done. Because sometimes I think that happens where you just kind of say, okay, people are excited, you want to pilot something, but there's really no exit criteria to say, how do we get this out of pilot into production? So I think it's having some type of vision to say, this is the outcome we want to achieve. This is the steps to get there. Step one is going to be trying this out with a department, a team, a person. But after X amount of months, we're going to now pivot from a person to a team to a department, like having that rollout strategy. Because that's another thing I've learned through experience, is that you have to have kind of a full rollout communication plan to kind of guide people through the change. Because human beings by nature like are very resistant to change, some more than others. So you have to kind of show them and say, okay, this is how and why you should trust me, is that we've gone through, like, so and so in your group has done this, they have testimonials. So you kind of have to show them over time that roadmap. Yeah, you definitely want to start, especially if it's new, you want to start small, because if it breaks, you can say, okay, we're going to figure out how to make this work and before we roll out to the next step, versus trying the all at one time approach, because then that's how you get burnout, stress, and just all the negative things that occur.
Yeah. Change management definitely is one of those things that, again, you start picking up more as you, I think, are just in
Yeah, I
the
mean,
space here.
no one teaches you that. I mean, if you're in like a, let's say, data science workshop or boot camp, like no one goes in the depths of change management and how do you get people to adopt. Like, you have to like create a proposal, you have to sell it, get people to approve it, get people to adopt it, roll it out. Like, it's all this, and guide people through the change. Those are all the steps you don't learn until you've done this a few times and kind of learn the hard way of, yeah, I rolled this out, no one used it, adoption was low, they don't understand it, no one told them about it, they don't understand they're rolling it. So I think a lot of those things, you really have to understand it to really kind of get these things off the ground. And when you see these stories around just things not getting deployed, usually it's because like those elements of change management, it wasn't very high value, or the solution just didn't deliver what they said it was going to, and people just abandoned it.
Yeah. It's there's all the project management side of things, which just gets things technically done, and then on the other side is like, yeah, but you can't forget the people. And it's just, I think maybe because we tend to be so technical, we forget that part. We're like, oh, they're going to see the value in it, and
Right.
it'll
They should
figure
just get
itself
it,
out.
right? They
Yeah,
should
they
just
should just get
like,
it.
they just get the aha, because they've worked on it more than I have. So they should
Yeah.
just understand it, right? It's just you see it and it sparks they're just the excitement, but it's like, yeah, that just doesn't happen. Like, typically they have a full-time job, and unless you're going to take time away, if this solution is going to take time away or save them something, they're into it. But if you're just going to give them more work, they're very much going to be resistant to change. Like, I already have a full-time job, I don't need you giving me more work to do. Like, if you give them less work to do, they're excited, but if it's more work and they perceive that, then yeah, it's very difficult to see this. So I think that's where, like, even with AI, you're starting to see these articles where people deploy these like Gen AI or these different Gen AI solutions, but actually it's caused people more work, and now they have to review the recommendations. They have to say, okay, this makes sense. They have to clean it, and then they have to implement it. So in those cases, you're also seeing it where people got excited about these different Gen AI, but it's either more expensive, it's causing people more work, or they're having to go right back to what they were doing before just because it just wasn't, so it's not ready yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we have to, as I made the joke earlier, we have to burn down the rainforest just to get a snippet of code in terms of like energy requirements. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking on kind of like the organization and kind of, how we can better set up, not just, again, technical things, but let's say the data teams. Do you have any thoughts in terms of like how data teams should be set up in terms of like what types of roles kind of should you hire first, and like should data teams be more centralized, decentralized? What have you seen kind of be successful?
Yeah, it's the age old question. I mean, I think we've kind of tried different routes around like centralization. We tried decentralized data teams, and they all have their pluses and minuses. I mean, to me, I've seen very successful just kind of the hub and spoke model where you have very strong data platform, data engineering, kind of those fundamental data management to kind of get the core things done, and then you have the ability to kind of put the data into the different business units. So introducing that, either you have data analysts, business analysts who are sitting in the business units, or you have people on your team that are aligned to different business units. I think the problem with centralization is that you end up with so much work that you just can't get to everyone, or you don't have enough concentration for people to be aligned to a business unit. Because sales is different than supply chain, marketing, operations, customer service. So that's where you kind of have to have that strong data foundation, but you also need people that are in the business who understand the specifics of it, who can actually implement, take on these types of things. Also, I think there's a difference between kind of core data engineering platform versus like data services, data delivery, data products. And I think that having all that in one team is very difficult to do because data engineers are much more focused on like pipelines, kind of building like data platform. But the people trying to deliver the data has to be much more into the business to understand, okay, who's going to use this for a purpose? What's the roadmap? How's it aligned to the business value? So I think that we're starting to see more conversations around like, do you start to kind of split over time like the core data engineering versus like the data products of it? At least if you have an entire data team, I think having those as separate teams is helpful. But over time, do you see those kind of split between like business functions versus like actual like data technology functions? Because I think in data realm, we lean very much into the vendors and technologies like Snowflakes, Databricks, Microsoft. But ultimately, the business just doesn't care. Like they want visibility into like sales pipeline. They want to see
Yeah.
the sales funnel. They want to see revenue. They want to see forecast, right? So I think that's where you have to make sure they have people who are understanding the business value of what they're doing, versus just like people who are just doing the hardcore like data technology parts of it. So I think you're start to see things split and not having just one ubiquitous, just one huge data team where everyone just does. I think you start probably with generalists, but over time you do want to have some specialization just because the business becomes very specialized and you need to have people who can speak that language and kind of deliver to those different needs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that especially as companies get bigger, that's generally what I've seen be effective, especially kind of that hub and spoke. It's what I really enjoyed when I worked at Facebook. The fact that they picked all the tools we would use. Like it's like, look, all your teams, you're going to use pretty much the same tools, or at least made it
Yeah.
very easy to work with those tools, so you wouldn't work with anything else. But you do whatever you want after that. Like it's like, okay, here are the tools, we're going to manage them, and then it's easy to swap it between teams. It's easy to,
Yeah.
it's much more standardized. And if you need to migrate, like we had to do like a Python 2 to Python 3 migration, everyone's doing it. It's all happening at once. There's no like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to make it happen, and it's a little more clean versus I think when I've worked with many other enterprises, it's like, well, that team has Informatica and that team has,
Right.
Alteryx and that team. And it's like, how do you
Yeah.
have 12 different or 13? And sometimes it's mergers, but sometimes it's just, one reason or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's the decentralization going bad is like if you have everybody, if you allow everyone to kind of have their own tools, pull their own data, the problem is like ultimately there's a hierarchy of the data has to get to executives. But if they're getting different numbers around like revenue or marketing, lead funnel from different people, you're going to have a big problem. Then it's going to be like governance. That's why you see, okay, well, we need data governance, or you need, we talk about like data mesh and things like that. Like you're going to need someone or some group that's in charge of rationalizing all this, because it's one company, right? You can't have different financials. You can't have different, like, you need to have very basic metrics to run the business, and you can't have those differently coming from different people. So that's why I think you need to have kind of a core concept of those like core metrics and KPIs, but those business units are responsible in different ways for like different levers to adjust those. But that's why I'm saying like it can't be either centralized or decentralized. I think that's where you can need that the hub and spoke. But you are seeing much more analytics teams. So I think I'm starting to see the place I've been at even now and other places, just like you see these different analytics teams. So the spoke part of it, where you see like, sales has analytics, customer service has an analytic team. So I think they're building up those different data analysts and business analysts who know how to pull the data and kind of analyze it, but they're not responsible for like pulling it from Salesforce or SAP or whatever. Like that's your core team that's pulling that, but they know how to utilize it to kind of make this business decisions.
Yeah. Plus, they don't want to have to learn how to pull from SAP. That's a very
exactly.
that's no one wants to learn. No, I'm kidding. It's all fun. In terms of like, because that's kind of pushing towards the culture and like creating, some level of data culture. Like, what do you think drives or creates kind of a great data team culture at companies?
Yeah, I think it's trickier now because a lot of us are remote. Back in the days we were in the office 5 days a week, you had that human connection. But in a remote world, I think you have to work even harder to have those touch points. So I think having regular, one-on-ones, team meetings, department meetings, if you can have on sites, I would say, bringing everyone together to have a meal together, to have brainstorming, icebreakers, like that kind of helps with the human side of it. Just because, like I said, we have lives outside of work. We have families, we have responsibilities, obligations. I think that's the human side of it. I think the biggest one is for culture is setting expectations of roles and responsibilities of your data engineer, they're responsible for this, your data analyst, your business analyst, your machine learning engineer, knowledge engineer, whoever's involved with the team, setting very clear expectations of like, this is what you're responsible for. Here's how we measure your performance. Here's here's how you meet expectations, exceed expectations. I think a lot of people just aren't clear about like, how do they fit into the world? So I think making it clear about you're here for this role, this purpose, and also tying it back to business goals and kind of business value of, hey, we're trying, like, this quarter we're trying to drive sales for this product or this service. This team is going to help us with visibility into that, and this is how you fit into that. So I think where you're trying to make sure everyone understands their part in the whole, and like, this is how you play in, this is how you play, this is your role. And also, I've seen a lot of challenges that people kind of like, you have these generalists where they're doing the same thing and they're stepping on each other's toes. Like, well, I'm supposed to do this, but John's doing this too, is not very clear. So these leaders making sure that it's clear around who's doing what. You're doing this, you're not doing this, she's doing that part of it. So it's making sure that the whole gets done, but everyone understands their piece into it. I think that's a huge one, and making sure you can tie it back to some business value around like, this is how what you're doing matters. You're not just kind of just in hamster wheel, just doing things for the sake of doing it. Like, yeah, what you do matters to the company.
Yeah, I think that last part's really important, because it's very easy, I think, in the data world to feel like you're kind of just given numbers and then it goes into the ether, and and then it's like, okay, but why did I spend my time? Like, again, early on in your career, you're so focused on like, oh, I just care about the technical stuff, that you kind of don't think about the impact. But I think somewhere in like year 3 or year 4, you're like, wait, but why am I doing all this? Or you start actually questioning what you're doing, and
you get pulled into so many different things, and it's very fast paced. Like, hey, can you pull this information? I need it for this. You reach out to the person. Did you use that? Oh, I didn't need that. Or yeah, I decided to do something else. But like, I spent like 3 days like trying to pull that, test it, ask people, and like, oh, I didn't need that for that. So I think you also kind of get jaded from just tasks going wrong, or like, I was asked to do this, no one used it. Like, is what I'm doing matter? It's like, especially with remote, if you're in the office, there's an energy going on, but if you're at home or working remotely, you're kind of like by yourself. So you're like, okay, I'm not around the team. I'm not in any meetings. Like, does what I do matter? You start to have like that reflection or self introspection. So I think that's why it's making sure people understanding, like, yeah, this or recognition. Oh, yeah, what you do matters. Here's what you're doing. Here's we appreciate it. So I think that kind of sets up a culture around just understanding the teamwork part of it. Because very rarely do any of us sit individually. We're usually part of a team. So I
Yeah.
think it's helpful to bring people together, understand, okay, this was our part in all this, and here's how we succeeded and accomplished in this organization, and here's why it matters as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's important to cover because again, like I just always remember just early on being like completely non-caring of that, not because I didn't care, but because you're just trying to figure out these technical issues. And then once you get your handle around technical issues, mostly you're just like, okay, yeah, like I think that the one you said that really connected is the one where it's like, so I keep pulling this data. And every time I ask them about it, they're like, yeah, we just went with our gut or whatever they said. And,
Yeah.
but like I put in effort, right? Like I built that. Like I'd love to hear on the other side that we used it for whatever. So yeah, I think that's something that always is just so it like hits home too hard sometimes.
Well,
I
you
think I
feel
wrote a
like
post about that. Yeah.
you take it personally, like, well, was it
Yeah.
something I did? Like, did I pull it wrong? I thought I did a good job, or I thought it was the right thing. So I think that's where, after a couple times, you start to push back and say, okay, like instead of telling me the solution, tell me what you're trying to get accomplished, or tell me the business problem, and I can help you with the solution. Because like these like these informational type of activities, or these like, well, I need some inspiration, so can you pull this, like, hey, this is someone's time, right? You know, everyone, if you're in the company, you're getting paid for your time, and at the end of the day, sometimes you have to go to your leader and say, like, this is what I worked on this week, and like you have to explain, like, I worked on this for this person. But if you're saying all I do is like pull these queries and no one uses it, then you kind of, it's hard to go to your leader and say, even like you're trying to do, get a promotion, you know, get a raise. It's hard to say, like, yeah, I pulled this stuff, no one uses it, and there's no value to the business. It's like, okay. So I
Why are
think
we
that,
paying you?
yeah, exactly. And it's like, okay, so if you weren't doing that all day, what would you be doing? It's like, well, that's what I do all day. I pull stuff for people and they don't use it. It's like, okay, it doesn't sound like a good use of your time. So we need to find something else that's more worthwhile for you to do.
Yeah. No, that's yeah, it's too real. I think for data people. I think I wrote a funny post about that at some point, where I said basically what we're saying. So too real.
Yeah.
In in terms of like some of the other content that I've seen you talk about, again, we talk about like the Tableau instance and self-service analytics. So you've kind of worked with a lot of tools and experienced a lot of it. I find that there's often kind of a difference between what vendors say and kind of what they offer. Again, self-service analytics being one of
Yeah.
them. How do you kind of cut through the sales part of it and figure out what tools you actually need to work with?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the beginning conversation around just the excitement. And I think when you're working with vendors, you really have to have like tactical, tangible use cases of it around, I plan to use this tool for this purpose. Or if you're not the person using it, pulling in the people who are going to use it, right? So if you have business users going to use it, you have data team members, those people need to get into the conversation and say, okay, how would you use this tool on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, right? I think if you just buy a tool and you're going around shopping and saying, hey guys, we got this great tool you can use, like people, like I said, people are kind of, they're resistant to change. So I think that's where you need to have the right people in the room to say, okay, on a day-to-day basis, would you use this tool to do your job? But also, like the point I made earlier is, people also don't want more work. So it's like, okay, how is this tool going to replace what I'm doing already? Or how is this going to save me time from what I'm already doing? So that's where I think that you have to have very tangible use cases, and you need the people in the room to kind of sign off and say, yes, I would use this. No, I would not use that. That's a waste of time, or it's too expensive for what we do. I only do this activity once a month. Doesn't make sense to spend this money and do a tool where I'm only going to do this once a quarter. So that's where you kind of have to take out the excitement around, like, oh, it's just shiny new tool, but you need to kind of have those very firm, like you have to justify, right? I mean, and I think sometimes it's not our money, it's the company's money, but I think you have to think about it as your money. Like, okay, if this was your own money, would you spend money on this? Like, are you going to get enough use out of it? Like, is this just for like vanity? Is so you can have kind of street cred? Like, is it for like, what are you trying to implement with this? But I think that's the key, is like you get to have the right. 'Cause I've done that in the past where I've advocated for like a $10,000 tool, but I didn't realize that really no one's going to use it. And I had to go around like trying to find people to use it. I had to figure out how to implement it into workflows, and just kind of blew up. We never used it. It was a waste of money. So, and I learned that lesson is like, you have to have the right people around to make those decisions and justify that with your leadership and say, okay, we're going to use this tool for these purposes, for this much money, for this frequency, and we think it's a good value, and have people as testimonials say, yes, we agree, it's going to be a good use. Because without that, it ends up being shelfware.
Yeah, it was literally the word I was going to say. Yeah, there's a lot of shelfware out there,
Of course.
for sure. I've seen a lot of, like, I've come into a lot of projects where it's like, oh yeah, we're using this tool, and then you go into it, and it's like, okay, there was a POC done here at some point, and then your logo is probably on their website, and that's probably the only thing that's happening.
Oh yeah, that's the funniest too, is when you talk to vendors and you saw these logos, you're like, I would love to talk to these people to figure out, usually a lot of them are probably former customers that didn't renew, they haven't used it in years, or they use it for a very particular time and they just stop using it. But like you said, I think POCs are good too, to get a lot of companies do offer demos. It's like, okay, how about we demo this for a month and like show me how I would use this on a day-to-day basis. And if they can't, then it's like, yeah, like that's the answer. Like you don't need this. Like you probably have the right tools already. Because like I've been in this industry long enough to say that very rarely is something like a tool problem. It's usually like you already have tools, but you don't know how to use them. Can you leverage other new features in the current tool stack? Because usually new tools mean like more vendors, more contracts, more renewal, things like that. So most likely you probably have something in your tool stack you probably already can use, unless the tool is like that monumental or transcendent. You probably got something you can use already. It's just no one's thought about it, or you just want to spin up a new instance of something because you think it's cool. You saw it in a webinar.
Yeah. And then you want to put it on your resume, and then then you're gonna quit because now you can get hired at a different job.
Or you went to a conference, or like you went to a conference and saw something, or talked to someone that's like, that sounds amazing. And then you get it, you bring it in, you're like, oh, it's not at all what I thought it was going to be, or what they said it was going to be. Or the setup and implementation takes you 6 months, and your boss is like, what happened to that thing we bought? Oh yeah, we're still trying to implement and configure. Like, it took us a year to configure that thing. That's another problem I've seen or had myself, is that just the setup time just takes forever to get these things off the ground.
Yeah. It makes me think of suddenly the Big Mac like ads. Like, here's what it looks like, and then here's the little small dried burger in real life. You're like, wait, but the TV said, but
yeah, exactly. It's huge in the commercial.
Yeah, it was huge in the commercial. It looked so delicious. It was shiny. Now it's not. But again, I think it's just part of the industry. And you start to learn to like cut through some of that, I think, and like you said, learn to talk to other companies that are like, hey, I see you're using the solution.
Yeah.
Thoughts? Do you like it? Are you using it? So
yeah, and I think there is a little bit of I would say pessimism, but like you kind of have to question, like, the business has been going on for X amount of, if it's, I guess it depends. If it's a new business, it's different, but if it's a legacy one, the business has been around for like years, decades, even sometimes centuries. Like, is this really going to help us? Or like, why haven't we thought of this before? Is it really going to help us? Is it going to move the needle? Is it really going to, do we really need to go down this path? So I think there's a little bit of pessimism around, like, please convince me of why we need to do this. Convince me of why this is important. Convince me of why we need to do something different here. Of course, we need to change sometimes, but also we have to kind of have a little bit of more like digging in, more due diligence around why we're doing these things, so that we just don't go around. Cause I saw a great LinkedIn post about feature engineering. We should do feature engineering. And then like we start going to this, like, that's still time, right? It's still, you're on the company dollar. Like the company spending money on this, is this worthwhile?
Yeah. I'm gonna just one comment, then I'm gonna ask another question. But like Joe Reese, I don't know if it was Joe Reese or someone he was like talking to, referenced that a lot of these businesses, the reason they have a data team is because they were successful enough to afford a data team, right? Like, it's like you have to have the money somewhere, which means you're already operating the business in a way that gives you that money, which means it's already in theory successful, right? Like if you can spend $1 million on data, that means you have $1 million to spend on data, which it came from somewhere.
Right. Because sometimes we also are a little bit arrogant, and I've posted that before. Like sometimes we get arrogant, thinking like, oh, the business is so poor, it's run so crappy. Why are they doing things this way? And it's like, yeah, but like they're doing something right, because like we all have jobs, we're getting paid regularly. So something's going right in the business. It may not be efficient. There may be opportunities to improve, but sometimes I think we think of everything as terrible, and all we need is like if we just give everybody a new Tableau report or Power BI report, that would just change everything. Or if they just like got rid of Excel, if they got rid of Excel or started using this, that would change everything. It's like, yeah, but they're doing pretty well without this right now. So yeah, I think that's another tricky part, is like the business is usually pretty successful, or else you wouldn't be around.
Yeah. Speaking of like what is valuable to do, like do you feel like there are projects that like if you had to like default to specific projects that generally are valuable and are the most valuable use of a data team's time?
Yeah. I mean, a leader once told me I usually kind of follow the money. Anything tied to revenue, if it's sales, if it's lead funnels, if it's anything to do with pricing, that's usually like a starting point. Just because if you listen to any presentation about the business, any public company earnings release, they always start with like revenue and sales. So I think if you have something that ties back to how the company can make money, either by helping them get new customers, get existing customers to buy more stuff, introducing new product lines or new services, I think more visibility or faster access to information about that, I think that's like an automatic no-brainer. After revenue is typically profitability, so helping them gain efficiency. So how do we do more with less? How we look for like cost savings? How do we look for labor savings? Typically, if you follow the money and figure out how you can either impact top line revenue, expansion of the bottom line through like expanding margin, cutting costs. I think those are the top ones. I mean, I think that's where a lot of people kind of get caught up in these like side projects that are nice to have, but really it does impact the business. That's where we really have to kind of follow like what's the benefit of this and how does this help the business with its core KPIs or outcomes, which is typically around revenue, costs, SG&A, margin, profitability. Like those are those key KPIs. And there's also the lead indicators, right? So you have your lead funnel, you have customer service. So even like those are leading indicators. So if you know like those metrics that okay, if we help them get in more leads to the company, that's going to help top line revenue. So I think having those projects that are either directly impacting numbers or indicators or leading indicators of those numbers, I think those are the good places to start with, and understanding your business and how to get closer to those projects that provide more visibility, that helps out with faster decision making.
Yeah. Do you have any tips on how to find those projects?
Yeah,
it's all the money.
It's a full contact sport, and I talk about this a lot. Where you have to go around. I would say step one is you have to talk to people in the business, right? You have to meet with leaders. Like of course, it's not going to be talking to CEO, but it's going to be talking with business. So I would say first understanding how the business functions, right? What are all the major departments? So operations, if you have manufacturing, logistics, you have finance, all these different departments. So understanding how your department works and asking your direct leader around, making introductions like, hey, can you introduce me to this person so I can talk with them, understand what they do, how we can help them out. So I think is having those conversations with different people around the business to understand, okay, what are the opportunities, what are the approaches, what's not working, what they need help with. I would say that's a huge start by just understanding what's going on and listening for asking, okay, what are the pain points? What are the problems? Writing all those down and saying, okay, we have an approach to help you out with these things. So I think that's a huge starting point, just kind of having those conversations, meeting with people in the business. If you can be in, like, usually most companies have those like revenue meetings, operation meetings that are like weekly or monthly. Getting invited to those meetings are huge, because then you can hear them talk about the business, and then kind of say, well, in this meeting, you talked about that we were hurting through this customer. Is there anything we can do to help provide more visibility into, what we're doing with, Best Buy or Target or Amazon or Walmart? Like, is there anything we can do there? And asking those questions, like, how can I help you? So I think really it's like it's human connection. Like you have to go and talk to people to figure out those opportunities. and like speak things back to them and kind of talk the language of the business and what they see as problems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that all really resonates. I always kind of go back to the example I think Ethan Aaron from Portable brought up when he was kind of leading a BI team where he's like, yeah, I would like go around. I don't know if it was like just a specific day, like Friday, with like, in this case it was like drinks, but like, a cart and I'd go talk to people and I'd be like, hey, that's Friday. Like, let's talk, because that's where a lot of, I think, the things come from. It's like through those conversations where
Yeah.
people's guards are a little bit down. They're not like trying to be like super like professional, maybe to some degree, or trying to say things in like more political speak, but they're just kind of being honest. Like, these are the problems I'm facing. And
Yeah.
then you can realize, oh, here's how I can actually help you, versus, sometimes if you don't have that relationship, they're going to maybe be a little more guarded,
Yeah.
not give you the honest truth about how you could help them.
Yeah, and it's a pivot from saying like, "Hey, what data do you need? Like, how can we use AI?" I think it's okay. We talked. You said that this was the problem. Here's some options that we have to overcome this challenge, and here's what we think we can do to help you out with this. Like, what do you think about that? And I think it's
Yeah.
I've very rarely come across a person that if you gave them the solution to their problem, they say, "No, don't solve my problem. Like, I want to deal with this problem. I want to go through." Like, they're like, "Yes, I want you to help me with this problem," or maybe that the problem's not significant. So that's another thing. Is like, okay, how significant is it? So if you find the problems that are significant enough, very rarely will you have someone that says like, "No, I just want to endure it. I want to go through the pain. I don't want you to solve it." They're like, "Yes, please solve this problem because it's pain. I hate it. And if you can help me out here, I would really appreciate it." And that's those wins and testimonials that they will tell their peers, and you'll get much more headwinds around. Like, yes, like you get the notoriety that you're a person that people want to talk with. You get referrals, and yeah, so and so said I should talk to you. Let's set up some time to chat. So I think it's very basic. Like, so it's nothing new age, no new techniques, just very bare bones, like human interactions, human connections, and talking with people and understanding the business and business problems and opportunities.
Yeah, yeah, and I continue to think that will become more of a premium if people continue to push for AI, where it's like, all right, so relationships will just become more valuable if most people are just either only able to communicate through someone else thinking for them or something like that.
Yeah. And even AI, I mean, you have to, like someone said, like you have to train the AI about how to think and what to do. So you only do that through knowing the business, understanding the business, right? That's why
Yeah,
you're hearing a lot about knowledge graphs, knowledge engineers, knowledge management. Like, we have to understand the business so you can give the AI like the information to know like how to navigate the business and know what to do. You
yeah,
can't do that just on just data alone. You have to give it some context too around just what's going on in the business.
yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, did I lose you? No, I didn't. Okay. Yeah. What was it? In terms of like projects, do you feel like there's any like almost like anti patterns of projects? Like, they sound good, they sound like they're going to save the company money or do really well, but they just tend to not be. They tend to be some sort of project trap.
Tons of them. I think usually like things that are operational reporting, where it's like, oh, we want you to pull data out of this system just to tell us this in there. It's like, okay, it's better if you have reports on top of the system. Like, if the system generates reports itself, that's a much better option than you like having to pull data out of a system just for them to see the data in the system. Like, that's like it sounds good, but it's just a lot of work to realize there's not much benefit to just showing them what is already there. It's like, maybe you go to the vendor and ask the vendor, hey, do you guys have reports out of the box that tells you already these things? Versus me having to pull the data out, build a data model just to give it right back to you when it's already there. Um, Reconciliation projects are always tough, like financial reconciliation, where you're like, oh, like, can you pull data out of our financial ERP system so we can our financial, like, those are dangerous because like, yeah, then you become in the middle of like finance and accounting it. Then you have to understand all the accounting parts of it, and general ledger accounts is like, I would say if you want to go that route, good luck with that. But I've seen that go on haywire too many times. We're trying to do financial reconciliation project, trying to do like a financial data warehouse, and it's like, I mean, it's fine to show revenue, but it's like ultimately revenue, like the final finance numbers should come out of like the financial ERP, like you have Oracle ERP or whatever ERP system. That should be the final. You can directly say, hey, this is where we think revenue is going to be at, but like the final numbers are coming from that system, not us. So I think becoming like a source of truth around like much more of those is very difficult. The automation, like trying to send data from one system to another system, those type of automation or like emailing things, I think that's tricky because, like I said, it's just very, it's high it's a lot of work, but just not very high visibility. Like if you're going to if you're going to the CEO and justifying what you're doing, it's hard to be like, yeah, like we're sending data from this system to the next, and they're like, well, like isn't there a different team that does that or a different tool that does that? Why don't they do it themselves? So I think those type of like low value types of things are kind of those catch-all, but they sound great because someone comes to, oh, it'd be great if we can get some reports on top of SAP that allow us to give visibility. This like, yeah, but SAP probably already has stuff that does it already. You don't really need us to do that. You probably should talk to the SAP team or whatever, Salesforce, right? Okay, Salesforce probably already has reporting that does that, so you probably can just talk to them to do that. So I would say those types of projects that are those gotchas where it's a lot of work, but it's just not, or people look at it very infrequently. It's just not a lot of benefit.
Yeah. The accounting automation style projects always hits home because like that was the first team I worked on was like a finance team. And like the senior engineer that had kind of set some things up before me left like 2 weeks after I started basically my internship, and then they never hired anyone else. And yeah, he had all these processes where it's like, oh yeah, this is how we're going to do like chargebacks for this cost center to this cost center.
Yep.
And I've automated it via this VBA Excel sheet. And then you eventually figure out something in that VBA Excel sheet, something about the actual accounting logic is wrong. And now you're like, okay, we've been doing this for a year. And, it's not like I'm going to be able to know what the accounting logic should be. I'm not an accountant. I'm going to be like, I can functionally make it work.
It's all in their head. Nothing's written down. So you're like having to then you're learning accounting on the side of here. Okay, well, you can do credits and debits, and there's chargebacks, and there's like these departments, and you're like, yeah, this is not like why we were here to. This is not what we're here to do at all.
Yeah, so it gets really dangerous really fast once you start writing SQL to do your accounting work. It's like,
we're not in finance. None of us studied finance. That's not what we're here to do.
Yeah. Kind of going maybe big picture. We're kind of getting close to the end of 2024 here. How would you recommend for basically managers, directors, and companies in general to prepare for their strategy for 2025? For data and business, et cetera?
Yeah, it's I think a lot of it, like I mentioned before, is going back to the basics. I think sales and marketing is something that we're terrible at internally. We're terrible at marketing like what we do and the value we create and like what we're doing here. The sales around like saying, okay, we have all these different data products, dashboard reports no one's using. So how do we turn a lot of this crap off and like actually go back to the basics of like we're here to do these things for the business? Because I think what we're going to see is that there's a much more data coming into the business, and people want to understand all these things coming at them. So I do think that what I call is kind of like reporting fatigue or efficiency, where there's only so much we can do in Excel, right? The Excel is a great tool, but processing large amounts of data, trying to figure out like what changed in the business, what the opportunities are. So I think a lot of it's going to become like, how do we become? So I think that's why people look towards AI. So the thing is, a lot of it's going to be, how do we become not to make it, we want it to be complex, but we also want to simplify what we're giving to the business, right? So it's like, instead of doing 1,000 dashboards, can we give them one dashboard that says, here's what we recommend that this department focus on based off all this information. Here's what's changed. Here's the business, how we think about decision making. So the thing is, it's how do we become more simplistic around our offering, and then making that like complex around how we do decision making, how do we automate decisions, how do we understand the business more. So I think it's going to be less data, much more nuance, like much more what to do with this, right? What to do next? What are the next steps? Like, 'cause right now we're expecting the business to figure this out, right? We give them a dashboard. They have to apply 5 filters to figure out, okay, this is what's going on. It's a lot of work that they have to do to figure these things out. Well, all these new tools and techniques, I think we have a lot more opportunities to kind of give them much more things around like, this is based off of all this information. Here's what we think that we should be doing next based off the criteria that was set. So I think that's what we're going to see is a much more simplistic nature. What we do with less like things we're pushing out there, we're doing less, but we're giving them much more nuance and much more like decision making capabilities. We're not asking them to do all the work. We're doing some of that.
Yeah, I think that tends to be this bad habit that most of us do, whether it's 1,000 dashboards or we give you 30 pages of charts.
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
like
like
good
to
luck.
think,
They'll figure out what's important here, and they're like, okay, and they just dump in Excel and do some pivot tables and things like that.
yeah, it's. I think part of it is we want to show that we're valuable, right? And if we show
Yeah,
you one dashboard, it's like, what did we? You might ask us, what did we spend all this money for? But it is kind of that, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter kind of thinking, where it's like, yeah, but if you the reason we have 1,000 dashboards is because no one's actually thinking what is important, right?
right.
And maybe some teams need their own personal thing, sure, but probably the executive team or the level of VPs who, whatever, there's 100 of them or something, they probably need one per department or something, or a few per department that really show the business. And maybe there's some ad hoc ones for specific initiatives, but overall, you're really trying to just hone that down into like, these are the exact numbers that matter right now that we can focus on, and can actually operationally impact too. Because it's like we can't do 1,000 different things this year. We can do like 10 really
Well,
focused
that's it.
things.
I mean, if you, like I said before, if you go to some of these different operational and business meetings, if you hear how they talk about problem solving, like they highlight a very specific problem and they say, okay, they list like 3 or 4 opportunities or different things they can do. They like pick 1 or 2 strategies and say, let's go dig into that. Like they don't, like they're not looking at these huge array of options and let's look at 50 different options. Let's dig into one at a time. It's like they're looking at very specific, like the brain, like, humans can only do so much decision making and process so much information.
Yeah.
But we give them these endless things around, okay, here's this huge chart of numbers. Click on these click on all these filters to figure out what's going on. They're like, I don't know. So I think, yeah, so I think we've, to your point, I think we've kind of, to show our importance, we've given them a lot of things and kind of sprayed a lot on the wall and saying, hey, look at all the stuff we gave you. But if you look at the adoption, they probably have like that number one thing they use all the time. The rest they use probably never, but there's that top reports. It's like, let's focus on that top report and figure out why do they use this dashboard the most and not the other ones. And let's filter into that and kind of figure out, okay, what do you do with this? How do we give you more insight? How do we give you much more like decisions to make? So I think we'll see a lot of that is like the reduction of our footprint just because we can't take on more data and create more reports that no one uses. So I think you'll see a lot more filtering in on like what's important and what's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost like I was just thinking kind of as maybe possibly an example. I don't know if this is what went through Chili's head, but obviously Chili's has gone through a resurgence. And I'm just thinking about the fact that, they probably saw the problem that like, oh man, every, McDonald's is getting expensive. So if we market that, we've got like a $10 meal, people will probably be interested. But they didn't just do that. They didn't just like market that. They also, I think, spent like $200 million to make the places nicer. So they actually like reinvested in it, so that when they put this marketing effort in, people are gonna come in. They're not gonna feel gross. They're gonna be like, okay, we spent all this money in. They feel happy, and then they simplified the menu so that operationally, like things are smoother, things are faster, things are cheaper. So it's like a whole plan, right? Like they focus probably on one thing. It probably started with like one discussion, and then it's like, okay, but how do we make all of it better, in kind of one go and execute on that? So it's really like they can't do a million things, but they can focus on one of these problems and expand into all the little problems that build it up, and try to execute in that way.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's the key question we should ask is, given all these options, how do they determine what's the most important?
yeah.
So how do they figure out, like, is it maybe based on priorities? Maybe it's the strategies, but I think that's what we should be figuring more out is like, how do we figure out what those top priorities are and digging into those top priority versus making everything a priority, which very rarely ever happens.
Exactly. I do want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to ask one more question. But do you have any thoughts in terms of like where data is going in the next like 3 to 5 years?
I think that I think AI is going to continue to dominate the. I mean, I've been around enough where I've kind of seen this cycle around the same topic. So when I was around, it was like data mining, and then it was predictive analytics, then it was big data, and then data science, machine learning, AI. So I think you'll see AI continue to dominate the conversation with these models. The problem's going to be is that we continue to not see a bunch of implementations of it. So I think you see like these kind of AI strategies that don't lead anywhere or kind of don't result in anything. But the ones that do, I do think that if you do find those true use cases, I think that data will. I think you hear a lot more about like data governance. You'll hear more about, like I mentioned, like knowledge graphs, and business context. So I think you're going to see data continue to be front and center in the narrative because AI is kind of the new shining tool that I think a lot of people will be interested in. But I think it's going to be like the companies and teams that figure out how to leverage it to help the business out is going to do very great. The ones that can are going to kind of be stuck in this kind of POC pilot challenge, and I think you're gonna like we're seeing a lot of people like CDOs are having challenges, the data team having challenges. So I think you're going to see continue to see a split between those people who are doing very well at it and those companies taking off versus ones that continue to struggle and kind of do nothing or kind of sit there. So I think AI has a huge opportunity to kind of help transform the business, but it goes back to the right use cases, the right resources, the right teams, and how do we leverage this stuff. So I think, like I said, AI is going to continue to dominate the conversation. So I think you're going to see a lot of data and AI kind of get bridged together.
Yeah.
But finding out the right people who can kind of lead the charge successfully.
Yeah, lead the charge and the whole like execute, because I think that's the other big gap that I tend to see is like just execution. Like I think you brought this up earlier, right? Like if someone hasn't done it before, it's so hard to do. And if you don't know how to execute, you can kind of try to figure it out, but there's going to be a lot of failed implementations because people are going to hear things, they're not going to know all the details, and then
enterprise, they think everything. Let's do an enterprise AI first strategy. And it's like, good luck. You're probably going to be updating your resume because you're probably not going to last too long because that thing's going to fall apart. So I think, like I said, it's going to take a couple of years, but it's like start small and kind of iterate and build it over time. So I think the smart people are going to go that route, and it's going to be quiet until you see like this big implementation. You don't realize that implementation actually started 3 years ago when they started with smaller stuff. They just didn't socialize it, but now it becomes like, oh, you just did this huge implementation. Like, yeah, we've been doing that for a while now.
yeah.
So I think you see like a lot of those starting points of a much larger picture.
Yeah, it's the whole MCU approach versus the DCU approach, where DCU is like, let's do it tomorrow. Tomorrow we have and you're like, that's not how that worked. Marvel took 10 years to build that.
It took them 11 years to get to Endgame. That didn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And now it's questionable, but it took effort. It took strategy, it took vision, and that's hard.
Yeah, setting the story, laying the framework. That's what they have to do first.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I want to be mindful of getting time, but do you have any final thoughts before we kind of sign off?
No, I appreciate you having me. Like I said, I would say it's a great time to be in data. People still care about us. People still care about what we're doing. We still have the intention of the business. So you talk about data, I think people are going to take notice and they're interested. We provide value. So I think it's just up to us as data professionals to make sure that what we're doing matters and we're delivering value and what we're doing is beneficial to the companies we work for.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. Awesome. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone who watched. But yeah, awesome. Thanks all.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.